fall happened. So sin has entered the world. All these good desires and drives that we have are now twisted by the fall. So our desires are corrupt and they're disordered. And in the context of, say, video game addiction, we might think of it as like an unhealthy relationship with games, where people are unable to control their playtime and their excessive gaming has a negative impact on their life, something like that, right? So that is a product of the fall, in the sense of we're not using the gifts that have been given in us in a way that's in moderation and in God's boundaries.
We live in a world where there is more access to information than ever before. Generations, young and old, are being exposed to radically different ideologies and opinions every day. It can be so overwhelming trying to decipher what's true and what's false. But there is a way. Join me as we discuss some of the toughest questions out there about Christianity, the Bible, and culture. I'm your host, Nick Lackey. Welcome to The Garrison. Welcome everybody to another episode of The Garrison. Today, I'm super excited because I have a doctor on the show, but he's not a doctor that works in a hospital. Instead, this is a doctor of video games, which I discovered was a thing not long ago. So I've got Tim McKenzie on me, or I should say Dr. Tim McKenzie on, and I'm really excited to have him on. We met a few months ago, and Tim was talking about the correlation between video games and the gospel, and it was so good I thought I had to have him on to explain it to us. So Tim, before we get into the topics for today, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us what you do?
Sure, thanks, Nick. Yes, I am Tim, and I didn't realize doctor in video games was also a thing until recently as well. Yes, so I went to the University of Canterbury. I did want to get into the game development scene, and at the time, there wasn't a game development degree. So I did software engineering as the next best thing. And then halfway through my degree, they opened up the School of Product Design, where they now teach video game development. And I was like, bother. But in your final year of your undergrad, you can do a research project. And so I had just done a whole lot of teamwork learning about this thing called agile development, which is something you do in software engineering. And I'm like, oh, what does this look like in the game development space? So I proposed a project where I'd be visiting game studios up and down the country. They said yes, and kind of went off from there and turned into a PhD and some pretty amazing experiences. We have a pretty cool industry here in New Zealand in the game development space.
Yeah. So because of that, does that mean you're one of the first doctors of video games in Christchurch at least?
Yeah, I could say that much. I don't know about around the world. But yeah, currently I'm a researcher at this place called the Human Interface Technology Lab, which is also based in the University of Canterbury. And I work in this thing called the Applied Immersive Gaming Initiative, which in layman's terms is basically we work with people or groups or organizations to understand their needs and their problems, and then we sort of develop games or simulations, VR or AR experiences to do training or education, raising awareness or behavior change, health or rehabilitation. So it's games and simulations, but applied for real world problems and for real people.
Yeah. Oh, that's incredible. Now, what about your Christian background, Tim? Because obviously these two things are intersecting, especially on this podcast today. So,
yeah, sure. So I go to a local church, St. Stephen's over in Shelley, and Latimer Church in the evenings. I've been following Jesus, oh golly, well, in one sense all my life, because I grew up in a Christian household, but I didn't get, I think, serious about following Jesus until my early 20s. And I went to the Equip conference, which is this annual interdenominational conference at the start of the year where it's a week of Bible teaching and fellowship, and just being exposed to people who were passionate about God and His Word. That was sort of the turning point. And now, I'm pretty involved in my church. I do serve in various ways. I run a Bible group in the book of Genesis. I think it's one of the best books of the Bible. They're all good, of course, but Genesis is the foundation. And then I also help support Christian Union, which is one of the student groups at UC, where, again, we share and teach the Bible.
Yeah, cool. And that's actually where we met, at Christian Union, at one of the meetings. Okay, thanks for that, Tim. Let's get into the first question, all right? My first question for you is, why are video games so addictive? In fact, is it true that the video game industry is, compared to the movie industry, is it more profitable, or?
So the video game industry, at least in 2020, it was like 170 something billion USD.
Wow.
So it was worth more than music and box office movies combined twice over. Like it is
Wow.
one of the biggest entertainment industries in the world. So it's how our generation like consumes media these days,
Yeah.
other than like social media and
I mean,
things like that.
I look to my own life and think I've probably spent more time on video games than I have watching movies, although I've spent far too much time on both. But yeah, so why then are video games so addictive, and how does that, I guess, relate to how we are designed by God?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, that's a very complex question. So I'm going to need to take a little bit of time to sort of unpeel that. So I want to talk about that as from like a design, a psychological, and then a Christian perspective, just to set things. And also, my research has been in game development, so the process of making games and how different teams work together, artists, designers, programmers, musicians, like all sorts of people from backgrounds. And so I wouldn't claim well, as a gamer, I'm very experienced in video games, but I'd never claim to be an expert in video games. So I'm just going to share what I know and what I've learnt,
Yeah, sure.
based on my own studies and that kind of thing. So hopefully it'll be helpful. So first of all, from a design perspective, I want to talk about why games are engaging. So we'll work our way to addictive. So what they are. What are games? So they're interactive systems with rules and goals. Players who are playing by the rules to achieve some sort of goal, and usually that's to have fun. And so this is true for board games or party games, sports, any kind of social game, and video games. So it's the nature of games. This is what they are. And when it comes to video games in particular, if you compare it to other kinds of software applications like, I don't know, Microsoft Word or even your social media, you're using it to perform some sort of task or get some work done, usually as effectively and as efficiently as you can do it. Video games is the opposite. So they're designed to sustain your attention and keep you engaged over long periods of time and sort of give you like a fun payoff. So it's not so much you're trying to do something in order to get something done, it's just the joy of the experience itself. And so that's the nature of games. So it's not like it's a bad or evil thing necessarily. It's just what they are. They're made to entertain and engage. From a psychological perspective, games are also compelling. And what I mean by that is that they're a narrative form, like books or theatre or even movies, right? So they tell stories. They have a narrative. They have messages. And they, just like any other form of narrative, they explore morality, the big questions of life, and have a take home. So that as someone who engages with a video game, you are thinking about or exploring some of these deeper things. And unlike books or movies or some of these other things, games are non-linear. And what I mean by that, like you open a book, start chapter 1, end at chapter 10, and the story just plays out, and you're kind of just like an audience to it. In a video game, you're an agent in the story, and the story can change depending on what you choose to do. And so you have an impact on the story world, and you get exposed to some of these moral decisions. Do I take this path or that path? Do I say something to this person or not? And then the story changes. And that has a much more, compelling engagement than some of these other forms of media. And so games can offer a really rich and deep experience that can be quite meaningful, impactful, and even profound at times. And some other aspects of games is that they're very immersive. And what I mean by that is that with a book, you're just reading it. With a movie, you're just watching it, and you're also listening. Games capture so many of the senses in both your emotions as well. So games aren't just for entertainment. There's a lot of games out there that when you're wrestling with some of these big ideas, you can feel sadness, you can feel indignation, grief or sorrow, shame, elation, relief, being unsettled. And so people might have these sort of, stereotype, I'm just playing games just to have fun or whatever, but they offer more than that. And so just like if I'm going to the movies and I can watch a comedy or a romance or a documentary, like games have that same sort of breadth.
Would you add as well? Sorry to cut in.
No.
Would you add as well? It's almost like a secondary life to you? I mean, some games are just stupid, right? Like I play a game sometimes with my friends called Rocket League where I drive a car and play football with it.
Yeah.
I say that out loud. But, there are some games as well which are, you're almost in a completely different world. I don't play this game, but consider like Grand Theft Auto, right? It's very open world. It's very free. You do what you want. You buy what things you want. You go to this place or that place. These games here are so open and free. It's almost like a different life. Do you think?
Oh, absolutely. So there's a game called Second Life,
Right.
where basically there's this whole virtual world. You can spend real money to buy virtual real estate, and then there's the whole metaverse that's coming in, where they're basically doing that. And I think there's again opportunity in terms of gospel, which we'll get to, but also a lot of danger, and we'll get that to you. But to answer your question, absolutely. But again, it depends on the genre. So as a consumer, say you come home at the end of the day, you're tired, you work, you don't really want to think, you just want to have some light fun. And there's genres of games like that. Or you want to be engaging with other people or socializing. There are games for that. Or there's games where the word game doesn't do justice to the experience, where you're actually walking in another person's shoes. So I was going to talk about this later. So there's a game called is it Bury Me, My Love? And it is a game that is a recreation of the experience of an asylum seeker fleeing from one of the Syrian refugee camps over to Europe to get a new life. And they've left their partner behind. And it's just, the whole game is you basically social mediating your partner while trying to build this new life and to get them to come over. And you're not playing it to have fun. You're playing it to get a sense of what it's like to live as someone else's life, and it just builds your awareness and empathy for what's going on. There's another game called That Dragon Cancer, and as you can imagine, it's not a game to have fun. It was made by a Christian couple, and it was their experience of having a child who developed cancer and then succumbed to the cancer. And it starts off with you literally taking the kid down to the park and putting them on the swing and pushing them, and you hear the kid laughing, and then you take the kid to the doctor and you get the prognosis, and the kid gets progressively more sick. And there's points where like you're in the church praying for the kid, and it's a video game, but it's not. It's this really profound and hard experience of this faithful couple going through this spiritual trial, this dark night of the soul, and wrestling with their faith and God's goodness and all that kind of thing through the perspective of the parents. And so as a player, you form an emotional bond with the child, and then when the kid gets sicker and sicker, like it leaves this big impact on you, and you're crying. Like,
wow.
So
yeah.
There are lots of games like that. Games that you play as an African American and experience discrimination, or games. Gibbons Beyond the Tree won a BAFTA. So there's now a whole British Academy Awards section for games beyond entertainment.
Right.
So games that have like impact or transform people. And so there's this game called Gibbon Beyond the Trees, where you're a family of gibbons, and it's a platformer, and you're just swinging between the trees. But then there's increased deforestation as humans are sort of encroaching in their habitat, and so you go from swinging trees to swinging on power poles in like a village that's encroaching. And so the game is getting a sense of what it's like from the gibbon's point of view.
Yeah.
And it's a fun game, and like the mechanics are good, and it's really entertaining, but at the same time it's affecting you without you even realizing it.
So video games can have more than just the entertainment perspective, rather than just. And I think the same is true of movies as well. Like, a lot of the time, like I went to a movie in the weekend about talking monkeys fighting each other. Right? I mean, that's kind of my type of movie. But I remember last year I went to the what was the movie by Angel Studios about the child sex trafficking? I forget the name. But it definitely was not a movie you went to just for pure entertainment, right? It was an eye-opener. It really made you empathize with what was going on, and caused a lot of people to take action and go donate money and stuff like that. So, video games can have such a vast impact on our emotions and cause us to change as people as well. So with that being said, Tim, let's get into the why, from a biblical perspective, a Christian perspective, why then are games fulfilling to us?
Yeah, sure. So that was the next one I wanted to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
to segue into there, when I was looking at game development, I was looking at user experience as well. And that's the psychology of gaming and how to create an engaging experience. And at the same time, I was doing a training and ministry course when I was doing my PhD, and it was run by the Gospel Training Trust. And we looked a bit about Genesis and also what we're made to do. And it was really crazy when I was looking at some of these factors in user experience and how they connected with the Bible. So I'll kind of lead us in if that's all right.
Yeah, cool.
So there was a book written by Celia Hodent. She was one of the chief UX people who worked with Epic on the game Fortnite, and Fortnite's one of the biggest games ever. And she wrote a book called The Gamer's Brain, and it's called How Neuroscience and UX Can Impact Video Game Design. And so it was exploring all the science and psychology behind gaming. And one of the key ideas was this idea of motivation. Why we play games? Why are they important to us? And she borrowed from psychology land this idea called self-determination theory, which is a framework for understanding intrinsic motivation. So why things just are inherently motivating. And so when we talk about intrinsic motivation, we're talking about the desire to do something for the sake of doing it, not because you're trying to get it to do something else. And so the three main characteristics is autonomy. So the sense that we're making real and meaningful decisions, choices that actually have impact on the world, and having the ability and freedom to express ourselves. So this idea that as human beings, it's intrinsically motivating to be able to express ourselves, to be able to make choices and to see the effect of those choices. And if we're powerless or we can't express ourselves, that's intrinsically demotivating. The second one is competency. It's this idea of feeling skillful or gaining mastery of something, growing in knowledge and understanding, progressing towards clear goals. So the idea that we're growing as people. If we feel like, say, we're in a job and in our work, it's like the same old thing, there's no change, there's no sense of progression or whatever, it's hard, right? So there's a sense that we need to be growing as people. And then thirdly, there's this idea of relatedness, which is the idea that we all have this need to feel related and connected to others in a community, which I think is pretty self-explanatory. So autonomy, competency, and relatedness. Now, there's also extrinsic motivations. So this is where you desire to do something as a means to an end. So it's the whole carrot stick. So I'm doing this to get the carrot, or I'm doing this to avoid the stick. And so it's the desire for rewards and avoiding punishments. And so that's motivating as well, but not in the same way as an intrinsic motivation. Now, video games provide all of these things. Minecraft's a great example because it's a computer-generated world, an entire world for you to explore. You can do whatever you like, complete autonomy, complete self-expression. You can build these works of art, these giant cities, and grow to master how the Minecraft world works. There's a whole thing of redstone, which is basically circuitry through the back door and logic gates and all that kind of stuff. And so there's this growing in competency. And then you make this fantastical world, and then you can play it with your mates or your family. And you can build this online community in this world that you've created. And so, it touches on all those things that are just intrinsically motivating. So you're like, why is Minecraft so powerful and so popular? This is why, because it has these aspects to it. Now, as gamers, some aspects of motivation affect us more than others. So, for example, my flatmates, one of them only likes to play multiplayer games because they need to feel related. And so that's like the bigger drive for them. And so they play games where they're playing with other people so they can talk to them, interact. And so they don't really, he doesn't have a sense of having fun unless it's fun with others. Where one of our other flatmates, he just loved narrative games, which is ones with like big storylines, big worlds with these rich lore and background and characters and these epic storylines where your choices are directly impacting the history of the world. And so the sense of autonomy, that you're making these meaningful choices and seeing the impact, really grabs him. So all of us have these sort of base drives to play games, but like some of these drives affect us more than others. And that's one of the reasons why games are so compelling, because these narrative forms that are sort of non-linear, they're interactive, and they have all this immersion and those sorts of things. Now, from a Christian perspective, how does this work? Because I'm just talking about like secular psychology or whatever. How does this connect with Christianity? Well, I say games are partially fulfilling, and what I mean by that is that where are these intrinsic motivations coming from? Well, let's open up the book of Genesis. So my favorite book. Genesis 1 and 2, we learn about how God creates the whole world right at the very beginning, and then creates humans in his image. And we want to know, well, what does it mean to be a human being? What does it mean to be made in the image of God? And we see in Genesis 1, and that's sort of explained further in Genesis 2, that we're made to do things. So God says, let us make mankind in our image to rule over the beasts of rule over the beasts of the field, the fish, the birds, to be fruitful, multiply, all these different things. And so part of what it means to be made in the image of God is we have this sort of function, we have a design, we have a purpose here on earth. And so what grabbed me was the almost one-to-one relationship between these intrinsic motivations that psychology had come up with and what Genesis says. So, for example, autonomy. We're called to rule over the fish, over the birds, all the animals as God's stewards. We're to take care of God's creation. And God gives us that dignity of that position, but he also gives us the freedom of choice on how we do that. Like the what is there, we're all called to rule over, but how we go about that, he actually leaves to our individual gifts and that kind of thing. So, for example, we see Adam naming all the animals. God created them all. He understands what they are, but then he gives us the dignity of figuring out what to name them and to express ourselves in doing so. And so there you see Adam giving this amazing autonomy. Competency. So human beings are called to fill the earth and subdue it. The reason being we want to, just like God over the 7 days of creation, had this sort of progressive order and beauty and wonder, he then hands that over us and goes, go to and do the same. And so we're filling the earth and subduing it, bring that wildness into a cultivation to bring it to higher orders of beauty and creativity and order and that kind of thing, and flourishing. So to help to maintain creation. And then we see in Genesis 2 that man was put into the garden to work it, to take care of it, to cultivate it, and to help creation be all that it can be. But that's something we have to learn. You have to you don't just instantly become a good gardener. You have to figure out how each plant, each animal, what is the environment, what it needs to thrive, what are the skills I need to do all these things. And so embedded in this call to fill the earth is to actually grow as people as well, and to gain skills, to gain competency and all that kind of thing. Finally, relatedness. We're called to be fruitful and multiply and fill the whole earth and form a community all over the world of God's images. So God's glory is throughout the whole earth. And so this work that we're called to do is to be done not by ourselves, but as a community. And then we see in Genesis 2, it's not good for man to be alone. God's like, I'll make a helper suitable for him. And so with this calling, we have these three needs or desires in our hearts. So we have a desire for autonomy, we have a desire for competency, we have a desire for relatedness. And I believe that's actually connected with our calling, our design as human beings. We're designed to do these things, so we have a desire for these things embedded in us.
So if I can try my best to try to sum up what we're getting at, is that we were created with autonomy, competency, and relatedness, or a desire to go and do all these things. And video games partially fulfill all of those desires, which is why we feel a desire to go and play them. And why? And that will lead on to addiction if it is abused, right? Or if you're spending too much time in fulfilling those desires in the form of video games, it will lead to addiction. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm getting it, but you're absolutely on the right track. There's also the intrinsic motivation. So I was saying before how we do something to get something. So we don't do the thing because we're interested in it. We want the reward. And God has given us work to do. So before the fall came, we're called to work in the garden. We're called to do all these different things. And God says, and I'll give you all the food. I'll put you in the Garden of Eden trees that are, good for food, pleasing to the eye. And so God offers his rest and his grace for us to sustain us. And so we're not just going out and doing all these things for the sake of doing things. God offers creation itself as a reward, and himself and the rest that he offers. And so there's this intrinsic, extrinsic desire to do these things to receive this award. And then he also says, not to eat from the tree of garden. I'm getting excited. Not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, because on the day you do it, you'll surely die. And so there's that. God, sets up those boundaries of what he's called us to do and what he wants us to avoid. Are we going to trust him? And so there's that. I'm going to put it crudely, but there's the carrot stick thing. So he promises us blessing for obedience and trusting in him, but he also promises curses and broken relationship if we choose to go our own way. And that gives us dignity, because it gives us the dignity of choice. Do we choose to love God or not? And so we see all those things play out in video games. And the last point I wanted to make about the goodness of video games and the goodness of creation before we go on to addiction, because that's the tricky bit, is when you look at Proverbs, the book of wisdom, in Proverbs 8, wisdom is personified as a person who was with God the Father during the whole creation of the world. And spoilers, it's Jesus. And in Proverbs 8, 27 to 31, Jesus is there with the Father, and he says this: I was there when he set the heavens in place, when he marked out the horizon on the face of the deep, when he established the clouds above and fixed securely the fountains of the deep, when he gave the sea its boundaries so the waters would not overstep his command, and when he marked out the foundations of the earth. Then I was a craftsman at his side. I was filled with delight day after day, rejoicing always in his presence, rejoicing in his whole world and delighting in mankind. Jesus being a craftsman, a builder, a maker, it wasn't a quirk of history, right? The Son, the eternal second person of the Trinity, has always been a craftsman. And we're made in his image. Colossians tells us that. So when we are making stuff for others and with others, and we're so filled with joy when we see people using the things that we're making and enjoying it. And I believe that these play experiences and playing experiences people have made for us actually touches something into the divine, because we're made in that image. Jesus is the craftsman, the Son is the craftsman, and God is the creator. And so when we create these experiences like video games or books or movies, we're getting delight out of them just as God created us and got delight out of making us. And in the virtual world, like in the real world, we're limited by materials and things, and we can't truly create things out of nothing like God can. Only God can create out of nothing. But in the digital space, we can create whole worlds and universes and stories and things like that. And so one of the reasons why games are so kind of fulfilling in that sense is that it's allowing us to live and create just like a creator.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Right.
So let's finish with this, Tim. And I know you've got so much good stuff to say, so I'm definitely going to have to get you onto a part 2 at some stage. But
sure.
Let's focus for the rest of the episode today on why then are they addictive.
Yep.
And then maybe on part 2, somewhere down in the future, is let's talk about how we can use video games for the gospel. But for now, why then are video games addictive? How do they go from being something which is partially fulfilling to then an addiction?
Totally. Great point. That was where I wanted to land. The fall happened, so sin has entered the world. All these good desires and drives that we have are now twisted by the fall. So our desires are corrupt and they're disordered. And in the context of, say, video game addiction, we might think of it as like an unhealthy relationship with games, where people are unable to control their playtime and their excessive gaming has a negative impact on their life, something like that, right? So that is a product of the fall, in the sense of we're not using the gifts that have been given in us in a way that's in moderation and God's boundaries. We're told in the Bible that there are 3 forces that, I guess, oppose us, the flesh, the world, and the devil. So I'm going to kind of frame it like that. So first of all, On the player side of things, our own selves, so our flesh, um, as I said before, we've got different drives for playing games. So my flatmate likes multiplayer, my other flatmate likes narrative. We also have like dispositional weaknesses. So some people are more, for whatever reason, whether it's physiology or biology or whatever, just have certain tendencies to sin in certain areas or to be tempted in certain ways. So I think we all have, particular weaknesses or vulnerabilities that are unique to each person. And that means we can be addicted to games rather than gambling or even particular kinds of games and that kind of thing. And so we might have addictive personality, lack of self-control, hyperfocus, ADHD, social anxiety, all these different things. Well, just a caveat. Things like ADHD or being on the neuro spectrum, like, has that negative stigma to it, but actually God made us and he knows what he's doing and he's given us unique gifts. So when I'm saying that, I'm meaning something that God's given us, which is good, that is a strength, but because of the fall can also be a weakness in the wrong context.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to flag that. So from our biology or nature, our environmental experiences, we can have these weakness of vulnerabilities. And so we can have a tendency to make idols out of games where we're seeking to be fully fulfilled, like I was talking before, but just in video games. And we're seeking satisfaction in these innate desires in games disproportionately, rather than in God or in people and other aspects of creation. So it's out of whack, out of order.
Yeah.
So that's the flesh working against us. Then we have the world. And so in the context of video games, I think that's often, say, the player community. So something like Fortnite has... Fun fact, there's about 2.7 billion gamers in the world. So basically a third of humanity are gamers. And so they're congregating around these big games like Fortnite. And there's all these worlds, all these communities. And so there's a huge cultural presence of people engaging with this stuff and bringing their values, bringing their desires and priorities. And when we're engaging in that creates a huge source of peer pressure to conform. Like your mates are playing the game, you're making mates while playing this game. And so people are, as I said, are often relating through the use of video games. So it's not so much, that need for relatedness and community in the gaming experience. And so the desire to conform or to assimilate into these large people groups is really strong. And with all the world, the values of the world and that kind of thing. So the world's against us in that sense because they want us to make us join its mold.
Yeah.
The last one is the devil. And I'm going to talk about developers, the game developers themselves, but it's not really about the game developer. It's the spirit behind developers. So it's always the devil behind the humans, right? So you might see certain game studios that rather than being driven by what is good for the player, it's what good for business. And so have you heard of these things called dark patterns?
No.
Okay. Well, it's not just for video games. It's any kind of tech or software. But basically, the design elements of games or social media, websites or apps, they actually just take advantage of our human biases and limitations. So it's applying psychology to manipulate or deceive us, usually to engage more with their products or to buy something, and to basically keep engaging with the product. And so the point of the dark pattern isn't to improve your experience, it's to improve their bottom line. And so a relatively inane example, a lot of games feature this old idea of daily login rewards. So log into the game, play the game, and you'll get some virtual currency or some other reward. And so it's that extrinsic thing. So you're not playing the game to have fun, you're playing the game to get this virtual reward. But it's causing like a psychological hook in your mind that, I need to log in at least once per day in order to get the reward. And so you keep playing. So it's a design pattern that's getting you to engage with the game, not so much for the game itself, but to achieve a certain end. So they're hoping by engaging more with the game, well, then you might buy more of the product, possibly. Now, not all games are like this, but there is certainly a increasing, because of competition and the world's saturated with games now, and people see there's big money in it. This is some of the things they can do, and that's to be fair, it's not just video games. So social media do a lot of this, things all over the internet. And there's been a lot of studies done that show the damage over social media use and all these other things can do. So there is a real danger there. And so I'm saying it's the devil, not necessarily because the developers are the devil, but the spirit behind them that's
Yeah.
influencing them. So it's that desire for world and money and that kind of thing. So games are addictive because we have our own weaknesses. The world wants us to be part of the mold, and then the games can go from engaging to addictive through, say, bad design patterns or whatever.
Yeah, and like with everything, we've got good desires. Like take, for example, an obvious one is sex, right? It's a good thing designed by God, and it's a gift to humanity. But when we take that desire and we misuse it and we abuse it outside of marriage, that's when it becomes sin, and that's when you get a whole lot of ugliness and hurt and brokenness. And I think the exact same is true of video games. You know, they can be a good thing, and I will finish here because I love where we've left it. You know, a bit of a cliffhanger. You know, games can be abused, and we haven't even really touched into looking at games which just promote things like promiscuity, violence, drugs, alcohol, all that kind of stuff. But, you know, that's all part of it. Games can be abused like with anything good that God has given us. So then, that leaves us with the question for next time. How then, as Christians, do we use video games? As you said, 2.7 billion people in the world are video game players. So as Christians, we'd be silly not to go and try use this as a way to communicate the gospel to people. How then do we use these to go and do that, to go and fulfill the Great Commission? So let's finish here, Tim. Thank you so much for everything you've said. It's really interesting looking into the correlation between video games and creation and how we're designed. And I've loved what you've had to say so far. So we must get you on again for part 2, where we can kind of learn how to redeem video games for the gospel. But for now, thank you everyone for listening. That's been Dr. Tim McKenzie, the video game doctor. I can't wait for our next one. If you guys enjoyed this episode, if you got something out of it, please make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. That helps get the podcast out to more people. And as usual, if you have any questions you want me to cover on The Garrison, email me on thegarrisonpod@gmail.com. But for now, we'll see everyone on the next episode of The Garrison.